The police sirens, missing persons posters, dark narrow back streets, terrified mumbling voices come out of the vent in the next-door neighbor apartment, and 5 human skulls. This is the mixture of the opening to today's series recap. In a real-life story, the murders had been executed between 1978 and 1991 by a cannibal classic serial killer. So let's dive in the story. Jeffrey Dahmer, who lives in a tenement where his room is cluttered with all sorts of bizarre stuff. His next-door tenant, Glenda Cleveland, complains about the odor that comes out of his place. He tells her that his family gave him a bunch of meat that has become rotten, and he soon will get rid of it. Jeff heads out to the bar and finds what attracts him. Guys. He offers them beer, but they take him as a peculiar man. He then asks them to pose for his camera. Plus, he'll pay them $50. Only Tracy Edwards takes the bait and goes with him to his place. Since his room is suffocated with a bad smell, Tracy asks to open the window, but Jeff suggests turning the air conditioner on instead. The door chain lock clicks, and Tracy turns to find out that he's locked down with a creepy man who prefers to read the Satanic Bible. Then, out of nowhere, Jeff handcuffs him and forces him into the bedroom. The TV is switched on to a horror movie, and that hideous large gallon vat, plus the huge blood stain on the bed. All that scares the hell out of Tracy. By now, Tracy knows that he's dealing with a psychopath who's attracted to him in one way or another. He takes off his shirt, and Jeff takes artsy photos of him, as he's accustomed to doing with his victims. The right moment has come, and Tracy hits Jeff, then runs toward the door. He fumbles his fingers through the door chain and runs off with his life to the narrow streets, where his running steps stop in front of a police car. The policemen knock on that same scary 213 flat. Jeff opens the door, and the policemen search the inside and find the photos of all the victims. They arrest him when Glenda from behind says that she has reported his suspicious activities. However, the police seem to ignore her many calls. At 2:30 a.m., Lionel Dahmer gets a call, and off the comfort of his bed to the Milwaukee Police Department, where he hears the shocking news of his son's peculiarity and many murders. Lionel can't believe his ears. Yes, his son is usually quiet, but a good man. He gets emotional, and self-blaming sinks in. He says that probably his divorce from Joyce, Jeff's mother, had a deep effect on him. Or it might be the hernia operation that Jeff had to undergo when he was a 4-year-old kid. The anesthesia damaged his brain. Yet, nothing is clear. The policemen show him facts and numbers: a human head inside the refrigerator, other body parts in the freezer, the drawer, and the acid-filled barrel. The dismemberment tools and tangible evidence that Jeff actually has eaten some of the victims. The non-conscious water sips followed by choking sobs. That's how Lionel Dahmer expresses his regret in a case that won't go wrong in the horrific murders. The yellow barricade tape indicates the crime scene, and the police ask the residents of the building to evacuate for their safety and for further investigation. In the police department, Jeff stands for the mugshot and then sits in the interrogation room. He waives his right to have an attorney and admits all of the gruesome homicides. Yet, the devil is in the details. In Bath Township, Ohio, 1966, when Jeff was around 6 years old, he used to sit away from the troubled kids. At home, where everything had started, nobody would give a compassionate ear to David's cries, who was the younger brother, because of the absence of the father and the mother who used to live on pills. Once, she attempted to take her life. Only Jeff could call the ambulance and save her. He would go hunting fishes from a nearby brook, then gifting them in a jar to his school teacher, who didn't appreciate the gesture. Instead, she had given it away to one of the students. Jeff saw the fish jar and burst out with a rough no. The lack of harmony and love between his parents had to pump in the lion's share of the aggression inside the little kid. Once, Joyce said something about a stinking smell around the house, and the next day, Lionel found a dead opossum. He appreciated the curiosity in his kid and told him the story about the lab experiment of the frog's brain that was dabbed in the acid cotton. Although things went south between the parents over Jeff's interest in the anatomy of the dead animals, Lionel carried on his tutorials on how to cut out the organs of a dead raccoon. Jeff grew into a young man. He shifted to his grandmother's home, who suggested that he better go on dating girls, but he couldn't give a dime about them. What had him interested was that standing male mannequin in a clothing shop. He decided to hide in the changing room until the staff was gone and the lights were off. Then he dismantled the poor mannequin and took it back home. Jeff vented out his fascination over the lifeless idol. But that had evolved pretty real and aggressive into admiring real men's bodies and killing them. In 1991, he lured a 14-year-old boy into his place. Bucks of money for nude photos. Jeff's victims were usually black or colored men. When he went out to buy more beer, the boy staggered his way out. When he came back, Jeff found 2 police officers questioning Glenda and other girls about the unconscious boy. Jeff claimed that he was his boyfriend. He took him back, and the policemen followed him. They had a biased eye over the whole white and Asian boyfriend's case. Otherwise, they could have found that there already was a body inside the bedroom. Glenda had no other choice but to listen to the a.k.a. and the Sunshine Band's "Please Don't Go" song with the drilling noise coming out of that vent opening in her room. And the Asian boy went missing from that day on. Back in 1959, Joyce was pregnant with Jeff. She was under 26 medications, pills for anxiety and others to help her sleep, to mention the least. She hated her pregnancy. When Jeff grew into a high school boy, Joyce won David's custody and left Jeff to stay with his father. Joyce had shown him how much she loathed him, because he resembled his father in almost everything, and that was what she couldn't stand anymore. He excelled in the science class and took the dead pig body home, so he could carry on exploring the organs of the animal. Jeff continued living alone and working out, driving his car through the trees, plus that magnificent running body of a boy, then cheering the beers, only as he had fancied him. His parents' separation took a toll on him. He was drinking beer in the math class, upon which he had been sent to the principal's office. On his way home, he met with this boy who's called Stephen Hicks, who was hitchhiking for a concert. But since there was plenty of time, Jeff suggested smoking weed and lifting weights at his home. Yet, he wanted more of Stephen, who insisted on leaving now. Things went ugly, and Jeff hit Stephen with a barbell, and then strangled him to death. He couldn't believe that he had just taken the life of a real man. He dragged the soulless body to the same place where, in the past, he used to check the guts of the roadkill animals. Then he laid it straight onto the table, and with an electric knife, he cut it into pieces. He had put those pieces in large garbage bags. On the road, the policeman noticed the unsteady driving car. He asked the driver to pull aside. Upon being questioned about the bags, Jeff said that since his parents got divorced, he was cleaning stuff and was up to trash the dirt and debris in the dump. Jeff must have done it right, because the policeman let him go. And with cold blood, Jeff got rid of his first victim in his father's yard. Back to the interrogation room, where Jeff admits that scattering what's left from the bones made him feel that Stephen was all around him. He cites the psychiatrist's saying, who has put a name to his condition, splanchophilia, in which the convicted criminal finds great pleasure in cutting the organs of the victim. And for 9 years, Jeff stopped himself from committing any murder, until 1978. He barely graduated from high school with a 2 GPA. After 3 months, his father came back with his new wife, Sherry. He wondered why he didn't apply for college. Lionel knew that Jeff was interested in science, hence, he got admission to Ohio State College. However, Jeff wasn't interested in studying science. Rather, he was interested in roaming around the science of cutting and smashing his victims' organs and bones. He got a 0.45 GPA. The dean called his father and told him that Jeff was being expelled from college. Lionel decided that his son needed the army. He had enrolled there to become a combat medic. A year passed by, and Jeff came home to spend Christmas with his father, who seemed proud, especially since Jeff told him that he'll go to Germany next week. But that didn't last long. In 1981, Jeff was expelled from the army because he engaged in violent activities against his peers. The father drove him to Catherine, his grandmother's home. She told him to go to the church. The next day, Catherine found the mannequin in Jeff's bed and decided to throw it away. When Jeff found that out, he became furious and yelled in her face. But then he apologized to her. The consequences of romanticizing Stephen in public took a toll on him, and he lost his job in the butcher shop. He went to an interview and got a job at a medical unit. His first blood donor was Doug Brozovsky. Jeff felt that weird feeling again. He then went to a bathhouse and almost drugged the many guys he met, but didn't do more. Until a day came when Jeff found the body of a man whose name was Stephen Tuomi next to him. He killed the man without him knowing it. He put the body in a bag and did whatever he could do, and kept the head in a chest in his room. Jeff's first two murders weren't intentional, but he felt ecstasy and decided to carry on with the heinous job on purpose. He would pick the victim, take him home once his grandmother wasn't present, and drug him, then strangle him unconscious downstairs. He targeted 3 guys and murdered them in his grandmother's house. Catherine heard thuds and smelled the odor, and Jeff told her that it was a dead raccoon. But Catherine spoke to her son, Lionel. He came over checking and asked Jeff to stop his experiments on the dead animals. One night, a black man named Ron sat in his car trying to drive away, but the car battery was dead. Meanwhile, Jeff knocked on the window's glass and convinced Ron to wait at his grandmother's house, which was a few blocks away. As his usual plan, Jeff drugged Ron by slipping a strange substance in his coffee. Ron was lucky because Catherine saw him and insisted that she wouldn't leave the fainted guy. The next day, he woke up lightheaded. Catherine and Jeff took him to the bus that dropped him off at the cornfield where he fell to the ground. He opened up his eyes in the hospital and told the nurse that a guy wanted to kill him. Then he went to the police department and reported the incident. However, the police officer said that there wasn't sufficient evidence that could strengthen his statement against Jeff. Ron's brain stood still for a while. That the officer is taking the word of a white man with a criminal record against a black man with a clean slate. And an Asian young man escaped after being drugged because Catherine stood behind the window alarming Jeff that she was seeing everything. The Asian boy went to his house and crashed the bed unconscious. The next day, the police arrested Jeff because the Asian family reported Jeff's attempt to molest their 13-year-old teenager. In the courtroom, the judge sentenced him to 1 year in the custody of the correctional facility. However, Jeff's blonde hair must have been meddled in the sound ruling of the judge. He granted him 40 hours per week of the work release. Jeff went back with his dad. They had dinner together, and Sherry told him that he must have to pay his grandmother back because she was the one who had paid the bail. Lionel thought of that chest that Catherine kept throughout the years. Jeff claimed that he couldn't open it because he lost its key, and while the father went to the kitchen to grab any sharp utensil to open it, Jeff grabbed Stephen Tuomi's head out the chest and hid it somewhere away from the curious eyes. Lionel was hesitant about what he would find inside the wooden chest, so he pulled his strength together and found copies of the Playboy. Then he breathed a sigh of relief. When he headed out, Lionel admitted to Sherry that there was always something wrong with his son, and he had the upper hand in raising the devil inside him. His love for the taxidermy and many other wake-up calls, however, he chose to ignore the signs. 1 year had passed. Lionel took his son from the facility and told him that he would stay 1 week with his grandmother. Then he had to move out and live on his own. Jeff found that tenement and met his next victim. Anthony Hughes was deaf and gay. He just heard that his friend Rico had been killed. He decided to man up and move out to discover the world and uncover the potential inside him. In Madison, The doors shut in his face, but he kept searching and finally landed a job as a photography model. He found Jeff in a club. They danced and became drunk. Jeff learned that they were similar at more than one level. They were peculiars and were marginalized in society. Jeff took Tony home and found himself unable to drug him. In the morning, Tony woke up and headed out for work, and Jeff managed to stop the strong desire to smash Tony's head. He went out, but in a short while, he came back to take his keys. Jeff murdered him and celebrated what he earned as a civil white cannibal. On the other hand, Tony's mother reported the absence of her son and gathered the community's donations, and Jeff put his contribution in the jar of the money. And lastly, there was Tracy's murder attempt. Back to the present, with the Milwaukee Police Department, where Chief Areola investigates the case, he is summoned to the mayor's office, who shows concerns over the public opinion. And those two officers who took the Asian 14-year-old kid back to his fatal end. At least, the family should know about their kids and cut the hope of finding them alive. Detectives Murphy and Kennedy tell the victims' families about their murdered sons. The traumatized community seeks justice, and the case now is its word against the weak stance of the monolithic body of the police. The national black activist, Reverend Jackson, visits Glenda at her home. She complains that the police didn't hear her out. He tells her that he's here to listen to all that she's saying. Glenda's anguish wasn't only the fear of living next to a murderer. One can imagine the piercing fear she had been living through the screams of the victims and the smells of the decomposition process of their meat. She, unwillingly, lived the murdered and the murderer throughout that high small opening in her wall. When that decent man called Dean Vaughn became a friend of Jeff, fear colonized her brain cells. The hapless scream kept coming, then that heavy silence, followed by the electric saw teething deep down the bones and fresh meat of the soulless bodies. Her many calls were met with negligence from the police. She complained to the building manager, Sopa Princeville, about Jeff, and implored him to evict him from the building. After studying the matter thoroughly, Sopa knocked on Jeff's door and handed him the eviction notice. Knowing that it's Gelda who complained against him, Jeff went to her place and gave her a meat sandwich. He wanted her to drop the complaint, but Gelda gathered all her courage and asked him to get out, and he left. But the victims were coming in with him. The fear couldn't grow more or faint less. It was just there. She is talking in detail, and Reverend Jackson is listening. He allows her to let it out. But if only that is that much easier. Meanwhile, Lionel asks to meet his son, who comes in chains. He asks his son from where all this started. His defensive mechanism chooses total denial. In 5 successive days, the sleep wronged its way to Lionel's eyes. He tells Sherry that Jeff has half of his genes. He must have passed that tendency of killing down to him. But Sherry stops him from beating himself up. His other son, David, is the opposite of Jeff. Lionel goes to jail with the attorney. They tell him about Ed Gaines' case that happened years ago, and which was similar to Jeff's case. What has saved him from sentencing to a lifetime jail is claiming insanity. Upon that, he spent his life in the hospital. But Jeff believes that whatever he did was while he was fully aware. A repulsive urge to kill. In the courtroom, the judge rules out that Jeff is in sound mind and will be sent to jail for a lifetime. After hearing the statements of the victims, then Jeff the murderer, the judge sentenced Jeff to 15 consecutive life terms in jail, or 900 years. And because he won't be able to see his son in the outer world, Lionel hugs Jeff and blames himself for creating the monster inside him. And Joyce writes an apology letter to her 2 sons, Jeff and David, asking for their forgiveness. The 2 cops who sent that Asian teenager back to his death come back on duty, and when Reverend Jackson learns that from the mayor, he promises that this is just the beginning. In the Columbia Correctional Facility, the guard calls on the number 117252, and Dahmer receives his mail. He's accompanied by the guard to his cell, He checks the mail and finds fans' letters. They have made a Halloween costume of him, and a comic book as well. On the other hand, the victim's family suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Some see Jeff across the street. Others have nightmares. And Glenda receives the Citizen's Merit Award. She accepts it on one condition: they must do better. But she has nightmares and goes downstairs to join the rest of the terrified residents. As for Connery's family, they're going to sue the city in the federal court for $10 million. However, the father gets death threats on the phone. The building's outer door creaks open, and Sopa comes in and says that he doesn't allow the residents to sleep in the lobby. Plus, he'll lower the rent by 25% for the ones who want to stay. But in a few days, he tells Gelda that the city is going to buy the building, and they'll be paid the relocation expenses. She thinks that they need to build a memorial for the victims, so nobody forgets them. In the chapel, a man stabs Jeff right in his neck. Upon that, he's transferred to the hospital, where he gets more letters from his fans. The news of the execution of one of America's serial killers, John Wayne Gacy, spread on the media channels. His words touch Jeff, who meets with the priest to ask him for redemption and forgiveness. The priest tells him it's not that he deserves to be forgiven. It's because God forgives no matter what. Jeff is baptized, whereas John's soul gets eclipsed from the light of life into the darkness of death. Jeff strives to be a good Christian and reads the Bible. However, a prison inmate beats him severely on his head until he dies, and Lionel comes to the morgue to identify his son. The scientists at Fresno State University propose to have Jeff's brain from the lab at the University of Wisconsin. However, since there is uncertainty about the inspection of Jeff's brain, the court orders to destroy it, and Gelda persistently seeks to have a memorial site at the parking lot where the Oxford building was situated when Jeff was one of its residents, one of the most dangerous serial killers in America's history. It's a mini-series which revolves around the complexities of human nature. The nature that at times becomes distorted and messy, and it factualizes the sickly involved racism and discrimination in the darkened background of the series. The series stars Evan Peters as Jeffrey Dahmer, Richard Jenkins as Lionel Dahmer, Niecy Nash as Glenda Cleveland, Molly Ringwald as Sherry Dahmer, and Michael Learned as Catherine Dahmer. It is directed by Jennifer Lynch and others, and it's written by Ryan Murphy, Ian Brennan, David McMillan, and others. Dear viewer, please drop your thoughts in the comments below with #CinemaRecap, and don't forget to press the bell icon. Until next time, stay tuned.